So there were, I think, 4 little essays from the text for this one. I don't know why I didn't intentionally do that. Usually it's only 2 or 3, but that's the way it lines up this time with the way the schedule shook out. So the first one is the caste, class, and family essay. So just that. And it talks about changes in human social organization brought on by the agricultural revolution. You just want to pay attention to what some of those, quote, dramatic changes in human social organization were that were brought about by the agricultural revolution that we talked about. And then, in addition to that, you have the spread of technology. So you got one on advancements in agriculture, one on advancements in tech. And the tech one talks about reasons that would, things that we could ascribe as responsible for the appearance of technological advances within civilizations. So why do technological advances occur within a given civilization at a given time? And again, you would just be able to list some of those reasons. And then there's one on feudalism. Feudal orders around the world, and what you're going to take away here, I know we talked about feudalism in the European context, and that's kind of obvious, and that's probably what you think when you hear feudalism. You think about medieval Europe. But interestingly, this little essay has a couple of paragraphs on 2 other places where you maybe don't think, that was also essentially feudalism as we know it. So pay attention not just to what it has to say about Europe, but there are 2 other places where feudalism emerges between like the 9th century and the 16th century, and you'd be able to identify those other 2 places. And then finally, there's one on trade and merchants that gives you 2 different views of trade and merchants. We've explored this a little bit in that we talked about how in China, merchants were kind of looked down upon, and that was not a noble trade there and whatnot. This actually explores different views of trade and merchants, juxtaposing Europe, the European perspective, and the Arab Muslim perspective. So you just be able to briefly compare and contrast those 2. That covers the documents, I think. Let's see. Yeah, and then so the 3 lectures were East and South Asia up to the Mongols, and then East and South Asia during and after the Mongols, and then we had our medieval Europe part 1. Those would be the 3 for this one. From the first one, East and South Asia, China and India up to the Mongols, I talked a good bit about Hinduism, so you should be familiar with Hinduism and the characteristics of Hinduism, which is, as you know, an outgrowth of Brahmanism, so that's not totally new to you. But you would be able to identify what are and are not characteristics of Hinduism. And then also with China, we ran through some of the dynasties, Song, Tang, and Sui, not in that order, of course, but Sui, Tang, Song. But I talked about some of the different achievements of those dynasties and which ones like patronize, say, Buddhism and Taoism versus Confucianism. Which dynasty is responsible for great territorial acquisitions, and which dynasty is responsible for the completion of the Great Canal, and so on. So if you were to have a list of great achievements, you could match those with which of those 3 dynasties, Sui, Tang, and Song. And as for the Mongols, we of course talked about the Mongol conquests, but you should be familiar with not just that, but what happens after the death of Genghis Khan. What becomes of the great Mongol Empire? And second half of that second lecture, we pivoted back to China. And of course, if you correctly answer that previous question, you'll know that the Yuan dynasty in China didn't last all that long, the Mongol dynasty. It gives way to the Ming dynasty, and I zeroed in on the Ming dynasty and spent a good bit of time talking about the Yongle Emperor and the voyages of Zheng He. You can tell I was pumped about that because we spent some time on that, and that's the kind of thing that you know I'm going to ask about because it interests me. So you should be able to tell me about the voyages of Zheng He, what was the purpose of those voyages, you know, what might they have led to, and then of course we explored the question of why did they stop? So those are all things that you can give back to me. And then it looks like I gave you 3 on Medieval Europe 1 since I felt bad about stretching this over spring break. So I gave you 3 on the most recent lecture and 2 each from the earlier ones. Maybe because I felt bad about the 4 little essays too. But anyway, this is kind of overlap from the last time we were in Europe. I talked about the various Asian and Germanic invasions at the beginning of the Middle Ages that resulted in the toppling of the Western Roman Empire. And here I got a little bit more into it and discussed which of these people settles where and how those become the roots of the kingdoms that emerge that we talked about at the end of that lecture. For example, the Visigoths settle in Spain, and that eventually becomes the Kingdom of Spain. The Latin language in the hands of the Visigoths eventually becomes the Spanish language, and so on. But we had multiple examples of that. So you should be able to tell me which invaders, Asian Germanic peoples, settled where. That makes sense? So I will say to that point, if you haven't caught on already, this particular quiz has a strong mix of like fill in the blank, matching, select all, written response, only a few actual multiple choice. Also in that Medieval Europe lecture, but later, getting into the 700s, the 8th century, 800s, 9th century, 900s, 10th century, we talked about how Europe was faced with a series of crises due to outside invaders. You should know who those outside invaders are. And this is later. This is not talking about the Vandals and the Huns and the Visigoths and Ostrogoths in like the 5th century. This is 700s, 800s, 900s. Who invades Europe and from where? We talk about at least 3 different groups. And hopefully they're known to you, and if not, you'll go back and watch that portion of that lecture and find out. And then end of that Medieval Europe 1 lecture, I begin to set up how England is sort of set on a different path from other parts of Europe in terms of the power of the monarchy being limited. And I gave you like 3 or so examples of here's how the power of the English monarchy is limited early on in the development of the Kingdom of England. So you should be able to identify from a list, like, yes, I remember we did talk about the murder of Thomas Becket and the conflict with the Pope and so on. And there are a couple other examples I gave you, and you should be able to then see those and then see another one and be like, no, I don't remember that, that's nonsense, that's foolish. Does that all make sense? Questions about any of that? Okay. Well, the grades in here have been all right. I'm not worried about you all. All my other classes that I'm worried about. Somehow we hit like quiz 3 in the midterm, and it was just like the plane crashed into the mountain. I don't know why or how, but that's where we're at. But you all do fine. I think, let me look. I think I left this open through Friday night.
Tomorrow, Friday night?
No, I'm sorry, I'm stupid. I don't even know what day it is. Sunday night. Is that better? Yeah, you got 24 hours. You got 36 hours, and that's it. No, it's open through the weekend. Yeah, I don't know what the heck I was thinking. So yeah, Sunday at 11:59 p.m. is when it'll close. And honestly, since we don't come back till Tuesday, if anybody wants to do it Monday, you can let me know, and I can leave it open extra day. So you should be good. We'll reconvene and go from there. We only got, after this, 2 more quizzes in the final, and we'll be finito. So time marches on, as it were. All right.